afternoon, everyone. This is the meeting of the Education Policy Committee of the Maryland State Board of Education. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very full agenda today, so in the interest of time, I think we'll just get right into it. The first thing on our agenda today are the praxis subject assessments, and I believe that's being presented by Kelly Meadows. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Whenever you're ready.
So the purpose of this agenda item is to ask the board to adopt two regenerated praxis assessments. Both of these assessments are subject area assessments. And just as a reminder, there are a battery of licensure assessments that are required as part of the blueprint for our Maryland approved program graduates, preparation graduates. That is basic skills, that is content, subject content, reading instruction, and pedagogy. And so these two assessments fall into that content bucket. So this is our subject assessments for family and consumer sciences and technology, education, and engineering. We currently have adopted both of these assessments. The previous version we're using currently as requirements. ETS, as part of their natural regeneration process, has rebranded these assessments to realign with the current national standards. And so we are asking the board to consider adopting these regenerated assessments. They will naturally expire, if you will. They will be pulled off the praxis line beginning August 1st, 2025. So we tend to like to give our educator preparation programs about a year to adopt and realign if necessary to these assessments, which is why we're here today. We have spoken with our content experts at the agency for both family and consumer sciences and tech ed, and both are in agreement that these assessments are appropriately aligned with our Maryland College and Career Ready standards. And so we are asking the board to adopt them at this time with a passing score that is recommended by the multi-state score setting panel. Their recommended scores. We are recommending that we adopt those scores.
Does anyone have questions for Ms. Meadows? I did look over the scores in the presentation earlier. Anyone? Okay, then this is I will entertain a motion then for us to recommend to the broader board that we adopt the new praxis exams. Do I have, Mr. Paul, thank you. A second. Dr. Johnson, thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, so then we will vote. All in favor of a recommendation to adopt, please raise your hand and say aye. These are members of the committee only. Aye. Okay, looks okay. Nay? Any abstentions? Okay, I believe we have passed to recommend adoption of these assessments. Thank you, Ms. Meadows. Appreciate it very much. All right, and the next thing on our agenda is the State Board Regulatory Review Work Plan, and this is being presented by Dr. Aileen. Is it doctor? Do I have that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Are you all able to see this? Okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to be presenting our the State Department of Education's Regulatory Review Work Plan. This pertains to our COMAR requirements per the statutory law. So for this presentation, I'm just going to discuss a series of items. I'll start out by giving just a very brief scope of the review of what the regulatory review process entails. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about exemption requests and why we might do those for the review. And then finally, I'll talk about how the public and stakeholders can be involved in this review. And then I'll end with a formal timeline of where we are now and where we will be heading all the way through submission of the final work plan. So the purpose of the review is, like I mentioned earlier, is just to make sure that the agency is in accordance with section 10-130 through 10-139 of the state government article. And the purpose of this review is to determine if the Title 13A State Board of Education Code of Maryland regulations meet the following items. So the first one is, do they continue to be necessary for the public interest? The second item is, do these regulations continue to be supported by statutory authority and judicial opinion? Thirdly, are any of the regulations obsolete or otherwise appropriate for some sort of amendment or repeal? And then lastly, are these regulations effective in accomplishing their intended purpose? So just to review, there was an executive order that was put forward back in 2003, and that order required the State Department of Education to complete an overall report over the course of a series of years. And so right now we're in the 2024-2025 report year. And in accordance with the actual executive order, there is a review schedule. And so you'll see below, there are a series of subtitle items here that are a part of Title 13A, which is the education chapter. And these titles are required to be included as a part of the review process. So you'll see on the left side, subtitles 7 through 12. And then on the right side, you have subtitles 13 through 18. So as a part of the review, what we are doing this year for the 2024-2025 cycle, there are a number of subtitles, as you all saw on the prior slide. So what we're proposing to AELR, which is the Administrative Executive Legislative Review Committee for the Maryland General Assembly, we are proposing to change up the way that the cycles are currently broken up. So historically, we have done this review of all the subtitles in 2 4-year cycles. So what we're asking for this year is to break it up into 3 2.5-year cycles. And what that means is that instead of taking more time in between the cycles, we'd rather have more cycles of review, but in a shorter time frame. So that will help make sure that we are up to date, we're staying current, and that the public is well aware and of what the changes that we're making to the different regulations. Just for context, we do want the public to understand that this regulatory review cycle is separate from our monthly COMAR items that come to the state board every month. And so you all know when you attend the board meetings that there may be some items that come up. Those items are ultimately technically a part of an overall COMAR review. However, this particular review is to do a full, thorough overall review of every single subtitle. So on the monthly basis, you'll see subtitles come up for review as needed, but this review is to make sure that we're covering every single item in each of those required subtitles. So on the previous slide, I just showed you just 12 really of the subtitles. This slide shows all of the subtitles here. And so it's broken down into the 3 cycles that we're proposing. So for this year, for cycle 1, we're proposing that the state agency will be responsible for reviewing subtitles 7 through 12. And so that will just be 6 subtitles. And then for the next cycle, which would be starting 2027 through 2028, we are requesting to then review another 6, 13 through 18. And then for the final cycle of the review, we're requesting to review subtitles 1 through 6. And if you're wondering why there is a difference in order here, the reason why subtitles 1 through 6 is put in the third cycle is because we've recently reviewed that set of regulations, and therefore they don't need to be next in line for the cycles of review. So they are now being proposed to be moved to the third cycle. So here are a list of some of the common reasons why the State Department of Education might request to have a subtitle or regulation, a group of regulations within a subtitle exempted. One of the reasons might be that the regulation has been amended within the past 1 to 5 years and is already being implemented. So if a particular regulation has come to the state board last month or January or last year, then that regulation has already been reviewed by the board and it's already been amended and or is already in action for implementation. So because of that, there would not be a need to review it again as a part of this overall review cycle. Another reason might be that an amendment for regulation or a set of regulations within a subtitle are coming to the board for permission to publish in the coming months. So we may already have a couple of items listed on the October or the November items to come to you all for permission to publish. So as a result of that, we may request for those to be exempt because by the time the report comes in January, those items would have already been reviewed by the board. And then lastly, if an amendment or a set of amendments came for permission to publish recently and they're still open for public comment, we would then also request for an exemption for review. And that is because it is still open for public comment. So that would mean that we're still reviewing feedback from the public concerning that particular regulation. All right, so when it comes to public and stakeholder involvement, the State Department and the board, we will be providing a variety of means to inform the public of this review and to invite the public to comment and invite stakeholders to comment as well. Some of those ways that we'll be doing that would be an announcement to the public at the State Board of Education Policy Committee meeting, which is today, as well as an announcement at the Public State Board meeting on the 24th of this month. And then 2 other ways that we'll be doing, that we'll be inviting the public will be through a notice of review, which will be posted on the State Department's website. And then lastly, there's going to be a stakeholder review committee, which is a part of the requirement for this regulatory review process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. So now I'm going to get into the organization of the review, meaning how this overall review process is organized. So first of all, we have a regulations review coordinating committee. And that committee, through that committee, the state superintendent is responsible for appointing the folks who are on that. And those people would be the executive director of the State Board of Education. So that would be Zach Hans. There would be a legal counsel person from the Attorney General's office, which in this case is Amanda White. Then there would be the executive director of the Office of Government Affairs at the State Department of Education, which is myself. There will be a policy analyst in the Office of Government Affairs, which is currently Laurel Kratzley. And then there will be a regulations coordinator and administrator to the state board. So some of the responsibilities, the roles and responsibilities of the committee that I just described, we have a number of different responsibilities and duties, but here's just a list of several of them. The main ones that we want to kind of articulate to you all is that our main purpose is to brief internal staff in the department on the purpose and the different processes that come into play with this review cycle. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very thorough, very robust cycle. It takes a very long time, and it's a coordinated effort to make sure that all of the offices and divisions have what they need to get through all of the subtitles and the different regulations that they have within those subtitles. So as a part of that process, this committee develops the work plan, which is what I'm talking with you all about right now. And then it gets disseminated to the State Department's leadership. So that would be Dr. Wright, the deputies, and the assistant state superintendents. And then throughout the process, we will communicate to AELR and then post a series of public notices, which I explained earlier. And then within that process, there's just a number of organization, administration, and coordinated tasks that are required to complete the final evaluation report. So that report is the final report that includes every single subtitle, every single regulation within those subtitles that have been reviewed. And that report also includes the recommendations from the offices and the divisions around what was reviewed, and what changes, amendments, or repeals need to be made as a result of that review process. So the next part of the organization of this review process is the internal review. And that review process is conducted by State Department of Education's leadership team. So that would be the deputies, the assistant state superintendents, and their program staff. These would be experts, specialists, legislative liaisons, anyone who is involved in reviewing regulations on a regular day-to-day basis would be a part of that internal review process. And so what that would look like is implementing the regulations that are the subject of the actual review. So these folks are responsible for making sure that once the regulations are moved forward, that they are actually being implemented as required. Some of the other things that our internal review staff will be doing is they're going to be doing the actual technical review of the assigned regulations, and they will be helping with putting that information into the evaluation report. So the Government Affairs Office will be working very, very closely, hand in hand with each of the separate divisions and offices to make sure that we will be reviewing their feedback that they give us, and then we'll be compiling the final report. So it will be a dual effort. Okay, and then lastly, there is the Stakeholder Review Committee. So this committee consists of members who will be invited to participate on the committee by the state superintendent. There will be a public notice of, or a public release, I should say, of when that stakeholder review process will begin to occur. And but that will not happen until after the internal review staff has completed their review and after they've prepared their recommendations for each of the subtitles that they have reviewed. So some of the roles and responsibilities for the Stakeholder Review Committee will just be to review the summary of actions that have been recommended following the internal staff review. This committee will also review a summary of public comments that we will receive as part of the open public comment review process. And then finally, they will provide, this committee here, the Stakeholder Review Committee, will provide recommendations for final action as it relates to all of the regulations that are under the review process. And so there is this one committee as well. This is the State Regulations Review Committee, also known as the Education Policy Committee, which you all are currently on right now. And so this committee will be responsible for doing the same roles that the Stakeholder Review Committee will be doing. So that will consist of reviewing the recommended actions that come forth from the department's internal staff, from the Government Affairs Office. This committee will also review any public comments submitted in response to the review. So whether that be public comments that come through the board meeting once the evaluation report goes forward for permission to publish, or any other comments, that come through the Stakeholder Review Committee process. So all of those comments will be put together and put forth for this committee to also review. And then lastly, this committee will provide recommendations for any final actions related to the regulations that are under review as a part of this process. So this is the last portion of the presentation. We just wanted to show you all a timeline for completion. Here on the left side, we just have all of the actions that will be taking place beginning today, all the way through January 2025. So right now we're presenting the work plan to this committee. Next, we will be submitting the work plan to the governor's office and AELR committee after we've received feedback from you all to approve the action for us to move forward with the work plan. and then a series of other actions will take place, including the AELR review. That's going to take 30 days. If for some reason it's going to take longer, we will hear back from AELR committee staff around the proposed deadline for when they'll give us feedback. And then we're expecting that there will be a commencement of the total internal staff review by October 31. So by the end of next month, there should be a commencement of the internal staff review process for these subtitles. There will be a public notice review that will be posted, and I mentioned that earlier. It's going to be on the MSDE website. It's also going to be submitted to the Division of State Documents for posting. And then between now and December 6th, we will finalize with staff all of the regulations that they are proposing to amend and or repeal. So through December, so December 6th is when the staff will submit their information to us. And then January 1 is when we will have the final internal staff review completed. So that will be January 10 of 2025, so next year. And then this just pushes out
Yes,
into.
hi, this is Mrs. Chen. How are you?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Good. I have one quick question. We are travel outside of the States to Europe, and I just wonder when we rent a
Jen.
car.
think she may have been on the other line. So, Dr. Aileen, please.
Continue. Okay. And so the stakeholder review committee will be appointed come January 10. So after the internal staff review has been completed, which is that as an agency, we've already finalized which regulations are going forward for review, which ones are being exempt. After that's all tied up in a bow, then the stakeholder review committee will be appointed. So between January 10th, excuse me, and May 31st, the stakeholder review committee will meet and the comments will be compiled. So there will be 4 months for the committee to be appointed, for them to meet and to begin to compile any comments, recommendations, feedback that they have based on the recommendations that the agency had given to them initially. And then there will be a 60-day period of time where those comments will be discussed. They will probably likely come forth in some sort of minimal capacity to the board. And then there will be a final draft report that's going to come to the state board. And in that report, there will be all of the recommendations that have been reviewed by the Government Affairs Office, by our internal staff from all of the offices and divisions, and by the Stakeholder Review Committee and the Ed Policy Committee, if there's any feedback and comments that come through here as well. Finally, at the end of the month in July of next year, then the state board will take action on the evaluation report. So by then, the report will no longer be a draft. It's going to be a final report that is coming to the board for permission to publish. And once it goes forth through that formal process with the board and action is taking place, the final report will then be submitted to the governor and AELR committee for approval. And that is all I have for you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Ms. McCusker.
Thank you, Dr. Aileen. Can you please bring down your screen so that I can see if anybody has questions? Thank you
Sure.
very much. Is there anyone who has any questions for Dr. Aileen about the regulatory review work plan? I do have one quick question.
Sure.
What is the process you guys are going to use for choosing the stakeholder review committee?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, basically how that's going to go is that we'll meet with Dr. Wright. And because it is up to the discretion of the state superintendent to determine how she's going to go about the stakeholder review process, it will be finalized with the state superintendent. And then there will be a comment or an item, I'm sure on a board meeting that will be made to talk through what that's going to look like as we get closer. I will say that you all will be receiving, this committee will be receiving the actual packet of the work plan, which has more details in it around which stakeholders we're currently looking at, as far as these are recommendations and suggestions based on past history of stakeholders who have been a part of the review process, but it's not final. So there's going to be opportunities for other stakeholders to be involved and such.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from anyone else on the committee? Okay, then I will entertain a motion for us to recommend that we approve the regulatory review plan to the broader board. So moved by Dr. Maley McCarthy. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Paul. Thank you. And members of the committee, all in favor of position of recommending that we move forward with this review plan, please raise your hands and say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Abstained? Then we pass that unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Lean. Appreciate your time. Next up, we have Mary Gable with our Purple Star Schools and graduation regulations. We'll start with Purple Star Schools, please.
Great, thank you, Ms. McCusker. This is COMAR 13A0610. Purple Star Schools came before you in 2022, and just a few months ago, you recognized we had a great celebration of our first inaugural group of Purple Star Schools that the governor attended. And we know Purple Star Schools are those schools that are meeting the requirements of doing something to welcome, address the needs, ease the transition of our military students who move into Maryland schools. So the regulation that, the COMAR regulation that you have before you today really is just doing one thing. In the legislative session, this past session, they asked in the legislation to add two things. One, in the consideration of who would be part of the military to be identified when they name the Army, the Navy, and so on, they asked that we add two things. One is the addition of Space Force to make sure that was in a regulation. And the second was the National Guard of any other state. So one, we had already included Space Force. So Space Force is already in our regulation. And secondly, we have National Guard of Maryland, but we don't have National Guard of any other state. So this regulation amendment simply adds National Guard of any other state. And so you are, will be voting to accept the request for permission to publish this regulation with that one amendment to add National Guard of any other state.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Paul?
Yeah, I'm actually just not that familiar with the way National Guards typically work. I mean, do we commonly have members of other National Guards who are stationed here, you know, working in Maryland? Or is the prototypical, you know, exercise of that clause going to be like a child of a parent, the parent, you know, living permanently in another state where they are in the National Guard, and the child in the custody of a different parent? Or I don't know exactly what's the deal there?
I think all your questions are really good, and I wish I had answers to all of them. I think it could be so in the interstate compact that I work with all the time, as you know, to ease the transition of military students, we look at National Guard that have been basically deployed. So there's some kind of emergency, because National Guard, as you know, does not move and get orders every couple of years to move to Texas or California, depending upon what the requirement is. So National Guard, when they go out and are sent to, it could be a country, but it also could be another state because of a hurricane or a tornado. I think what it is what if we ever needed National Guard to come here? So it could be the whole family, and they were here, they were from another state, but they had to come here and they were living here for a period of time. So I think they wanted to make sure to recognize that. So if your son or daughter was moving in to a school because you had to move here for a period of time, it would be one. I think this other circumstance that you gave is also a good one. You don't typically see that National Guard of another state, but it was in the legislation, and so we're updating the Purple Star COMOR regulation for you, so we're compliant.
And if other states in the compact, you know, also recognized in that way, such that it would serve, you know, Maryland tied people in their states, it's fine. I was curious about it. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Good question.
Dr. Maley McCarthy?
This is just a question. Why is this only open to public schools and not non-public? Or
Well,
non-public that serves special ed?
I think that's a good question for you. Do you want to, as a board, the language in the regulation says for public schools, or the statute said public schools. And so we get that question, Dr. Maley McCarthy. We get that question, and we basically review the statute and review COMOR. I just made a presentation on this this morning, and we are not exclusive. We're trying to be inclusive, but it does. And as you know, and I don't have the data right in front of me, at this time. I did at the presentation. There may be 30 states. There are a lot of states that have Purple Star. So the language, to Mr. Paul's question, is consistent and encouraged across the state, across the country, and the numbers that have Purple Star. The Commission for the Interstate Compact does address public school students. So when we do the Interstate Compact, we work with DODEA schools, but not private schools or non-public schools.
Just asking, and I just put it up for conversation because I think the question needs to be asked and probably could be answered. So, not that you didn't answer because you did, but do we need to consider it?
And I think basically, if you want us to consider that, we certainly can. And looking to the state board, if you are interested in considering that, then you are certainly, I'm kind of looking to you to say, how do you as a state board want to do that? And you could think about it in terms of how we want to. The language right now says a public school.
Right, as I read it, I saw that. Yeah.
Quick question. Is it a substantive change if we have it address public and non-public?
I don't think it's, but is it substantive now? It's not. Amanda, you answer that question.
So if you were to change that moving forward, that would be a substantive change. So you would, in terms of the process, but I think to Ms. Gable's point, you all are able to make changes because you have not sent it to the Maryland Register for public comment yet. And because it hasn't been sent, so what I want to say is, like, substantively, like, yes, that would be a huge shift in terms of what this does. But you are able to do that at this juncture before it goes to the Maryland Register.
Okay, because we're in permission to publish, so we can just make changes here.
Correct. One thing I did want to point out, though, is that for the public schools, this will include students, special education students who are transferring in. So those students may be placed through an IEP process at a non-public special education school. But this is really, I believe, and Ms. Gable, correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of this program is to assist with that transition. So special education is one of the services that they're looking at when that child is transferring in.
Okay. Dr. Malin McCarthy, do you want to make a motion of any kind?
Yeah, I think I'd word it this way. I move that the board consider including non-public schools in the Purple Heart Initiative. Purple Heart, I don't know what is it? Is it regulation? Is it, what is it called? What would that right terminology be?
It's,
It would be, yeah, it would be the regulation number 13A.
Regulation. Okay.
Yeah.
I just would make a motion that the board consider it.
Okay. Is there anyone to second? Mr. Paul, are you seconding?
I had a question. I had to step away for just a second. And well, is this the time for questions, Chair?
Well, we need a second on her motion, and then we can discuss the motion. So if you want to second her motion, we can throw in a discussion.
I'll second. I'm still
Okay.
For the purpose, yeah, for discussion.
Yeah, that's all seconding does is, okay, so we have a second in Mr. Paul, and then we can have discussion and questions. Mr. Paul?
Yeah, main question is, I had to step away for a moment, so forgive me if we covered this like 2 minutes ago. I apologize. For the other kind of ribbon type designations that we do, blue ribbon school, this and that, are those also public school only or public and private? What's the status of the other various recognitions of this kind?
Non-public schools can apply for blue ribbon. We have one. I don't know if that's still, Ms. Gable, I don't know, but to my knowledge, let's put it this way, to my knowledge, non-publics can apply for blue ribbon.
yeah. One of the things that I want to, and this is not answering that, but I did just quickly pull up the statute. So this comes out and the Maryland Code Education 7-129, Amanda. If you would, and in the purpose, this is a Purple Star Schools program. The purpose of the program is to recognize public schools that provide strong services and support. Subject to the department shall designate a public school as a Purple Star school. So I would, Amanda, ask you to review the statute, which it's certainly we could review this and come back to you. There's not a rigid timeline on this. We have to, I think we have to address, we always address what's in legislation and go and update the regulation. But I want you to, this comes not directly from you. It comes from the statute, sorry. And the statute requires us to create regulations. Amanda, do you have any?
So I think the issue that you're bringing up is whenever the board passes regulations, it has to have statutory authority to do that. And so the statutory authority right now is in Education Article 7-129. So that governs specifically public schools, and the language of the statute is specific to public schools. So I would recommend that if the policy committee wants to consider whether this needs to can be extended to non-public schools, that we probably would want to take a deeper dive, not in this meeting, around whether there is statutory authority to do that, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. Yes. Thank you. So any other questions or comments? So then I think that what we need to do is take a quick vote on whether or not we want to ask the board to consider this or at the next meeting. All in favor of, but I'm not.
Chair McCusker, you have a motion and a second on the table.
Yeah, so I think I have to vote on
for
that
the-
first. Yeah, what I meant
to-
by recommending was recommending what Dr. Malin McCarthy had on her motion because she wanted us to recommend that the board consider this at the next meeting.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I have that right, correct, Dr. Malin McCarthy? Yes, okay. So on the matter of whether or not we recommend exploring adding non-public, that's the vote we're taking right now. All in favor of exploring whether or not we can have non-public added, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay. Opposed? Abstained? I got two abstentions. Mr. Gadam, I didn't see your vote.
Oh, sorry, I voted aye.
Aye. Okay, so that's 3. Does that pass, Mr. Hands?
Yes.
It does. Okay, so we'll ask the board to consider that next time. And so that will be up for discussion with the board at the next meeting. Okay,
Can I ask a question?
yes,
So at the next meeting, which is your September meeting, is that the meeting you're talking about?
yes, ma'am.
So you want me to bring forward any information regarding the motion, not bring forward the permission to publish? Is that correct? Or bring forward permission to publish with other language, or we'll look into it and
We haven't, yeah. I think I would like you to bring forward information and then the board will go from there. Dr. Michael.
Yes, that would be great. And in addition, Ms. Gable, if you could offer for us, based on the feasibility and just confirming that it would be consistent with the law and those pieces, what a potential amendment aligned to this. So my quick review looks like we'd simply add public and non-public. We'd add that language, but what, recommendation on what that language is so that we could, if that's the direction, we'd know how to make changes to that in the full board meeting. Chair McCusker, does that sound acceptable?
Yes, but definitely bring information on whether or not we can even do it based on the statutory authority. Mr. Paul.
Thank you. Yes.
So is the vision that at this meeting, we'll get information about the authority, and then we'll sort of vote on one of two versions of it, either as it is or potentially extending it to non-publics. Is that so it's going to be one of those two?
Yeah, what has to happen in the meeting, as I understand it, if we're going to have a change, someone will have to make a motion for an amendment to what we already have here. And when that motion is made, we can ask questions, and Ms. Gable and Ms. White can bring forward the information to help the board make a decision on whether or not they want to do an amendment or leave it the way it is. So we would vote on the amendment first, and then however that passes would drive what we do in the next vote. Do I have that correct? Yeah, I'm getting yeses, so okay.
I'm
All right.
going to bring you two versions.
Perfect.
And information. Got it.
And information, because if one version isn't even legal, then
Right.
sure it's legal.
Right. We
Okay.
can help. Amanda and I will chat.
Okay.
Thank you. So we
Thank
have a
you.
second one.
Yes, please.
This one is Comar 13A 030212. This came to you before. There were two pieces. We're only coming back with one of them. This is the graduation requirements for public schools, and it is specifically addressing a student in foster care or homeless. What this regulation did with the amendment, by the way, you approved taking this amendment and gave it permission to publish. It was published. We had no comments. So I'm bringing the regulation to you now, requesting that you adopt the regulation, which puts us in line with the requirement that students who are foster care or homeless students who enter a local school system in their junior year. You already said in Comar that entering in their senior year shall be granted a waiver from locally established graduation requirements. This extends that for homeless and foster students to junior year. No comments, come before you requesting adoption.
Any questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to recommend permission to adopt, and if we recommend, that'll go into a consent agenda. So this will just be, so I'll take a vote, I guess, a motion on whether or not we put this in consent agenda. Mr. Paul? So moved. Do we have a second? Dr. Manley McCarthy? Okay, all in favor of recommending adoption and putting this in consent agenda, please raise your hand and say aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gable. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. And next up, we have Dr. Shana Cook with Comar 13A15, 13A16, 13A17, 13A18, Maryland Infant and Toddler Programs, permission to publish. Dr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair McCusker and committee members. We are seeking permission to publish amendments to all the different chapters that Ms. McCusker already mentioned to ensure families in licensed and registered childcare programs receive information about the Maryland Infants and Toddlers Program. Families with children under the age of 3 through statute must receive this information at least one time per year. And our goal is to have this information be distributed through a personal message from the child care provider, a document with confirmation of receipt, so like maybe a paper document that goes home, or a text message to ensure effective communication. The Maryland State Department of Education's Division of Early Childhood will provide a brochure to assist child care providers with sharing this information. And again, we are seeking the Education Policy Committee's approval to move forward with publishing these amendments.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing no question, then I will entertain a motion for us to recommend to the broader board that we give permission to publish. It's moved by Dr. Maley McCarthy. Do I have a second? Seconded by Dr. Johnson. All in favor of a recommendation to the broader board that we move forward with permission to publish, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much. And Dr. Cook, we also have Comar 13A.15 Family Child Care Educational Programs in Non-Public Nursery Schools, the other one.
Yes, thank you again, Chair McCusker and committee members. We are seeking to republish these non-public nursery schools in family child care settings regulations. So this is Comar 13 A15. The initial amendments, proposed amendments to these regulations were introduced in 2022 to allow family child care providers to operate approved non-public nursery schools. Revisions were made in 2023 following stakeholder feedback, and the board approved those proposed regulations to move to move forward through through the process, the promulgation process. However, MSDE has discovered additional changes, and these proposed changes that we're bringing forward now are very, very minor. But what they do is they fix definitions, operational requirements, inspection requirements, administrative hearings, and public access records to really support the implementation. And then just as a reminder to the full board on how, or to all the committee members on how these regulations came forth, the goal of these regulations are to support mixed age learning and peer effects while maintaining staffing requirements and family child care programs in order to support the scale up of high quality pre-K through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. The initial goal of these regulations were to allow family child care providers seeking an early childhood teaching certificate or license so that they can work in pre-K to have an internship or practicum take place in their family child care home. This is now one of the many pathways that family child care providers will have to become lead teachers. Since we originally produced and introduced this regulation in 2022, there have been updates to Maryland statute, Maryland Code of Education statute 7-1A-04, which was originally coming from House Bill 770 that passed in the 2023 legislative session, has allowed for greater flexibility as well, but we'd like to retain we'd like to continue to move forward with this proposed regulation to retain this additional pathway for family child care providers. And so we are seeking the Education Policy Committee's approval to republish these proposed regulations to facilitate the integration of family child care settings into non-public nursery school approval.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Comments? No? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve to the broader board, to recommend to the broader board that we approve permission to publish. Moved by Dr. Maley McCarthy. Do I have a second? Do I have a second from the committee? Mr. Paul, thank you. Okay, any discussion? All in favor of recommending to the broader board that we approve permission to republish, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay, looks unanimous. Thank you very much, Dr. Cook. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last thing on our agenda today is the proposed literacy policy. There is a change made to this from what we had originally published online on our agenda. We had originally published this as an action item, but since then a decision was made to move it to an information only item. We are going to be welcoming 3 new board members in the month of September, and we want to ensure that they have adequate time to review this extremely important policy and have time to weigh in and have their voices heard as we move this policy forward. So today's presentation on the policy, and we'll be going through it in sections as we go through, will be for information only and will not be an action item. Okay, so I believe we have Deanne Collins and Dr. Smith.
Yes, thank you.
Presenting today.
We are.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith is going to share the presentation, and while she's pulling up, I just wanted to say thank you, Ms. McCusker, and the board. On behalf of Dr. Wright and MSDE, we're really appreciative of, we want to acknowledge the additional time that we'll have to engage with the board, especially on new board members, since this is a really big decision. So thank you. We really appreciate that. There are some really good ideas that the board members have shared. So this will also allow us some time with board members just to dig in a little bit deeply. So we'll spend our time still going through the updates that we made this far, and then utilize the time to get some more concrete feedback for making additional edits. So thank you. Dr. Smith, you can go to the next slide. So we'll provide a summary of feedback from version 2. That was the version that we shared at the board meeting last month. Go through the changes based on the organization of the policy, and the board requested some additional information. So there's something specific that Dr. Smith and I will share as well. So in terms of the revisions, just so you know, we've received over 1,200 comments, so it continues. Even today, we received some feedback and comments, and so we're grateful that we'll get the comments and can go back and make the changes. We just wanted to highlight and emphasize here in terms of the focus on core instruction. We tried to go back and really define even more the tier 1 and what that means more clearly. Again, provided the specific criteria for reading interventions, but also tried to, in shifting to an asset-based language, focus on less a deficit use of language and more to growth-minded language in the policy. Continued with making sure we're talking about supports for all students and looking at LEA policies for promotion based on guidance from MSDE. There was some feedback on terminology and the use of sort of working through multiple opportunities with parents to provide consent. So we added additional language related to designated consent from parents, made sure we stayed aligned to any existing COMAR. And we did update the timeline to reflect feedback. You might have noticed that the implementation date was shifted to 25-26 without the retention. So those are some of the big overviews of the changes. Going through some of the, going through specifically the sections of the policy from version 2 to version 3. In terms of section 1 performance, we did not make any revisions, but for section 2 and definitions, we tried to go back and define dyslexia to reflect, again, more of an asset-based language, and tried to add some additional clarifying language to define what tier 1 instruction really means. So I'll kick it over to Dr. Smith to continue with some of the changes that we've made and additional information.
Thank you, Dr. Collins, and thank you guys again for having us. Within section 3, based on the feedback, the team made several revisions, including removing conflicting information about the teacher licensure component, COMAR 13A 12.2. We also restructured section B for more clear alignment by including assessment within the structure for reading instruction, assessment, and intervention. In addition, we revised the parent notification section and merged that together with the student reading improvement plan so that there was additional alignment and included suggested language around consent as well as risk around retention and promotion. And the last part was we added some clarifying language that specifically states, as requested by the Students with Disability Lobby, that they would not be denied access to special education services using this particular policy. In addition to those changes, there were several changes by adding clarifying language around the parental consent component. We wanted to make sure we included in the parent notification component, we wanted to include an explanation for why a kiddo may not have met their reading performance level, as well as an explanation of the risks and benefits of both promotion and retention. and included a document that would capture parent or guardian's final consent for a particular grade level designation. I think at the last board meeting, Ms. McClusker, or I'm not sure, it's a board member asked what universal screener assessments are being utilized in Maryland. And currently all 24 LEAs administer per COMAR 13A.03.8 a screener. Dibbles is the most widely used screener in the state. iReady, Acadience, NWEA MAP, Fluency, and the growth component, and or we have one that uses a mirror. The reason we have so many is that some screeners are used at different grade levels, depending on the need. For instance, Acadience may be used for kindergarten, and iReady would be used for grades 1 through 3. I think that was what was requested by the board. I think another thing to remember that as a reminder, per that same COMAR, students identified as being at risk for reading difficulties within that COMAR, their LEAs are required to develop a supplemental instructional plan to address that student's identified need. So with that being shared, that would be the last part, and we're ready to take questions.
Thank you. Can we take the screen down for a moment just so I can see who has questions?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
That's okay.
I can share, but I cannot unshare.
Oh boy.
I got it. Stop.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's still on there.
Oh.
You're gonna want to click the green box that says share on the Zoom.
That's the one I'm connecting.
Okay.
Clicking.
Okay, well, while we're working through that, oh, good, okay.
I do have a question.
Okay, yes, Dr. Johnson.
So on slide 5, in your revision, so are we talking about all students with disabilities meeting the same standards? Or adding clarifying language to ensure students with disabilities are held to the same standards? And revise the parent, well, here's the part about students with disabilities. Under revisions for B3, you see it?
I'm having a difficult time hearing Dr. Johnson. Is anyone else?
I'm sorry. On slide 5, revisions for B3. Added clarifying language to ensure students with disabilities are held to the same standards. Are we speaking of all students with disabilities? Is that possible?
Dr. Smith or
Yes,
Collins?
So this was language submitted by the Office of Special Education, and it should have read, students with disabilities are held or not denied services. So held to the same standards by not being denied services as outlined or required by IDEA.
Okay, so I think we should add that language in.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I think I'm catching a cold.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I had a quick question.
I have one more.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It was slide 6. On slide 6.
Yes, ma'am.
You talk about what has been done, what was done, what will be done rather, but you don't talk about what has been done to ensure that students, once they get to that 3rd grade level, have had all of the interventions and strategies that they need. How will we make sure that schools are documenting the intervention programs, strategies that have been offered to the students?
Yes, ma'am. If you look at bullet 3, a description of the proposed interventions and support that will be provided to a child to remedy the identified areas of reading difficulty, either in the retained year or the prior year. So we can add that additional language in the retained year or the prior year.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have, Mr. Mikowski.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I hope you feel better. Goodness.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Maley McCarthy?
So thank you. There's a tremendous amount of work that's being done on this. With everything except the retention policy, I think there's been good work. I will not support a policy that includes targeted retention. So I'm just telling you that. I submitted my reasons to Chair McCusker and Dr. Michael earlier today, and they can share it with you. But I am telling you that I will not support that. However, that being said, there are other things that maybe we can consider.
Dr. Maley McCarthy, would it be helpful to bring the policy up so that we're going section by section?
We could, because I do have it on pages of the policy. So
yeah, so I was going to ask one question about the slide deck, and then I was going to move us to the actual policy. Does that work?
That's fine.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions about the slide deck?
I do.
Okay, Mr. Greer.
Yeah. Slide 7. I just want to check those universal screeners. Is that representing the number? Is that representing full coverage of the state, or is that just some use multiples? Does this cover all 24 LEAs?
This covers all 24 LEAs.
Okay.
Across the state.
All right,
Some
great.
do use multiple screeners.
I think we should clarify that really simply on the slide before we present it wide.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with questions on the slide deck? Okay, I have a quick question. Dr. Smith, the first bullet on number 6, slide 6 says an explanation for why the child has not met the reading level performance required for promotion. Is that meant to be a root cause analysis given to parents, or is that just meant to be presenting the data that says the child is not qualified for promotion? Because the way I read that was like it was going to be some kind of root cause, but when I looked in the policy doesn't really say root cause. It just says, presenting data. So I thought that maybe we might want to word that a little differently so people don't think that we're going to be pulling out root cause stuff, because quite frankly, that's,
Yes. Okay.
I don't know how we do that.
Yes.
So.
It's just simply reporting the data.
Yeah, I think if we're a little clearer on that, that would be great. Thank you. All right. And now if you would kindly bring up the actual policy. We'll go down in sections, and I know that people want to just kind of go section by section, and then we'll let people, that way we can keep it organized.
I think Dr. Collins is going to share this one.
Okay,
I have
great.
9 screens open.
You and me both. I've got 3 different screens with I probably look like I don't know what I'm doing because I keep looking all over the place today, but okay. So Dr. Collins, you're going to bring it up?
Yes, I think I have the right version here, just making sure. Okay, let me share my
Okay.
screen.
I have version 3.
Might
We
be,
have
easy. I'm
4
gonna try and
version
download
3s.
it first. It might be easier to look at it this way, and then let me make it bigger here. Okay, let's try this. Share. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the first section, the purpose section. And then we get into the definitions here. Just let me know when you want me to pause. Stop. Okay.
You're muted, Chair McCusker.
No wonder. We can just pause at purpose. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And then members of the committee, I will do my best. I can't see everyone with the way my screen is. Are there any members of the committee that want to comment on the purpose section? I don't see anyone. If you wanted to, please jump in because I can't see everybody. Is there anyone? No? Okay, great. Can we move on then, please, to the definitions section? Okay, is there anyone with questions or comments concerning the definitions section? I'll scroll through and see what I can see. I don't see any. I did have one quick question in the definitions section. On D, where it says evidence-based means that the program or practice has been demonstrated to be effective through research, and then it says research-based refers to the development or implementation of programs or practices that have been demonstrated to work through scientific studies, experiments, or academic research. Both talk about it being through research, so I was a little unclear about that definition because it both you used research to define evidence-based and you used research to define research-based. So I was really unclear about that. Dr. Michael, I see your hand is up.
I'm wondering if there's a federal definition with ESEA that we might be able to draw on to get that to the next level.
Yes, we can do that. Not all research-based information is evidence-based. And so that was an attempt to, but we can clarify that using ESEA.
Okay, thank you. And I just, all right, thank you. Anyone else for the definition section? Okay, seeing no one, then let's go ahead and move on to the policy standards section. Do we have any questions or clarifications in the policy standards section?
I do.
Okay, Dr. Malin McCarthy, please go ahead.
So on page 6, I have 2 comments. One is nomenclature. In public school systems, we have speech language pathologists, not speech teachers. And so I would like that to be named appropriately. So I appreciate that. We also have speech language pathology assistants, but they're not speech teachers. So I think that should be cleared up. The second thing I have on page 6, number 4, we talk about MTSS as well as special education. It's the special education is discussed later on in the document, but would helping teachers understand when MTSS doesn't work, when to make that decision, or some comment about the nexus between MTSS and special education. I don't have anything clearly outlined in my head, but I'm wondering if there shouldn't be a mention, because I love later on in the document when you talked about not denying access to speak to special education. So I'm just wondering if something should be put in this section.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. I think we can clarify that MTSS is not the route to special education. It's the route to provide interventions for students to ensure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Anyone else for this section?
When you say this section, you said policy standards. Is that
Yes,
everything?
yes,
Or-
we're still in policy standards.
And this
Yes.
is
Yeah,
pretty
but I mean,
big,
is
so
that
just
all
let
the
me
way
know the
through like
page
A,
number.
B, C?
Mhm.
Yeah, this is, yes.
Okay.
Yep. This is up
Um,
through, yeah.
And then also clarifying, Chair McCusker, you said committee members.
No, Mr. Greer, I'm sorry. You as a
Okay.
board member are certainly welcome to comment this evening. I
Okay.
apologize.
Okay, I don't want to take time and space from committee members, but I do have several comments, so I'll just
No.
wait for anyone.
No,
good?
you're not taking time and space.
Okay.
This is to do this, so please do. I apologize for the way I said that.
No apologies necessary. We're all human. Thank you. Okay. Few things, team. I really appreciate you all hearing the feedback that I brought loud and clear last session. So kudos and thank you for being so flexible as we go through this. And again, thank you for keeping this process open so we can keep hearing from folks. A few things. Most of my comments are in D. And so D3. I am wondering if, and not making any amendments here since I'm not a member of the committee, just for all those who are watching to pay attention here. I am wondering if we can make D3 say, instead of is designated for retention, may be designated for retention if the parent or guardian consents. And I would like to explore whether or not that's valuable and worthwhile. Keep going or yeah, great.
Yes, please do.
All right. D3A. By when? Do we have a thought about that?
We are exploring definitive dates. We just did not want to be tied to a date within a policy that
Yeah.
may change depending upon the assessment that is utilized. So if the assessment takes a little bit longer to disaggregate and to get the
Yep.
data back to the LEAs, it would really tie us to a particular date. So we're going to add that to the guidance.
Yeah, that's great. And fine. President Michael, do you want to jump in?
It would be helpful for staff just to give us some confidence on like time windows without dates. Like, is that
Yeah.
something we should expect for closer to the end of the school year, or is that something closer to the start of the school year? Just to give us a sense, because it does it resonates what you're saying about that living in guidance.
Yeah. Okay. D3B. This may be a board member Greer thing, but I'm just having a reaction to the word waive here. I would prefer it to just be always referred to as consent. I really want us to impress a humanistic response to this, and I think that the best way to do that is not have parents not have the LEA or the school set up a situation in which the parent is needing to waive their recommendation. Instead, it's they consent to the recommendation. I would like to add into D3C. Oh, my bad. I moved on. D3C, again, remove waive, and then add in at no cost to the parent or guardian. I think that's probably assumed, but I would like to make sure that we don't end up saying the parent is going to have to pay for, or the child is going to have to pay for, in some way, summer school. Pause me if you have any questions or clarifications. D3D, question from my side. What's considered due diligence here? So what happens if the parent or guardian is never actually contacted? I think we need a definition of this in the policy. I don't have a recommendation, but happy to help put heads together and work on one. But I appreciate I appreciate this item because it's showing that the school, the LEA, the adults have to do some due diligence here in order to get in contact with the parents or guardians. But it's I just with a policy hat on, I want to know what they're going to have to do. Maybe that comes in guidance later, but I think what is the decision here? And that's based on if we take the recommendation that I'm providing that the student may be retained if the parent or guardian consents. I realize the way it reads now is the student's going to be retained, and I'd like to try to change that. D4B 2. Oh no, I'm sorry. In D3 overall, and maybe it's in D4, I actually don't quite understand why D3 and D4 are separated out. It might just be my not totally close read on this, but the bigger note here that I have is I would prefer that we have a note somewhere in D3 or maybe in D4 that there's a standard review of the risks, not the benefits. I think sometimes we talk about the risks and the benefits. I think we need to outline what are the risks to retention and what are the risks to promotion. And that should be research based. It doesn't need to be a lot of data. It needs to be a single page thing that's simple and easy to understand, and that is like a couple of bullet points. Again, I'm very happy to help try to build that because I think it should be a state built document, not an LEA built document. I think it should be consistent. D4B2. I know why we have this one, but I don't. I'm having a bit of a reaction to it. It feels like we are making this a we did our job and you didn't parents situation. And it's going to be really hard, I think, for schools to then provide that documentation and might create a perverse incentive to actually not even worry about it and still socially promote the student. I think this could be really problematic. Because our school's actually documenting all of that communication and all of those steps. Where are they going to keep it? And also, I would prefer that we sort of treat this as a, like I said a little bit earlier, a little more humanistic and say, like, it's not about we did our job here. It's that your child just isn't reading yet, and we need to provide them with some additional resources. And here's where it's going to come from. D4C2. I think the language here also should be may, not will. D4C3. This should include that it is research-based risks of both retention and promotion, and then not necessarily benefits. I don't think that we have to belabor the benefits here. D4C4. Again, I think we should use it no cost to the parent or guardian as some language there. D4C5, question to the team. Again, this is a timeline question, and so it might go into guidance, but what's the proposed timeline to consent? So if the parent or guardian are there in the meeting, are they being asked to sign on the spot? Or do they have time to consider? I realize how much of an additional burden that creates if the parent was hard to contact or get into the space in the first place, or it's hard for, I should put it this way, if it's hard for the parent to get into the space. And so I know that we potentially run the risk of that being hard, but I think it's the right thing to give some time for the parent to consider, the caregiver to consider. And so those are my inlines. Overall, I'd really like to find a way to also add in something, and I don't know if it's in 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 here, that relates to the school having some accountability to ensuring that the student was taught by a high quality trained, like a high quality or highly qualified, sorry, teacher, or I'm sorry, and that if they are retained, they're also being placed into a classroom that is not the same classroom as the year before, the same teacher as the year before, or something to that effect. Again, this is one that I think that needs some massaging, and I'd really love to sit with the team and talk about it. But my thought here is that I think that the school should also be able to say, we ensured that your student had a qualified teacher. Maybe I don't need to say highly qualified, but a qualified teacher teaching them literacy. And they still need some additional supports, and we're going to provide them in the following ways.
All right. Is that everything, Mr. Greer?
Yeah, that's everything.
All right. Mr. Paul.
Yeah, I want to start by saying I really strongly agree with a lot of what Mr. Greer mentioned. So in particular, the things that stood out to me as points of great agreement were the articulating specifically no cost to the parents, and making sure that the documentation about the risks, and I do think it's worth discussing benefits as well, of promotion and retention, making sure that those materials are coming from the state and are of high quality and are sort of dispassionate, even-handed. I think those are really important. I really want to echo those. I want to just articulate another point of view. I think it's good to hold on to the notion of waiver and not transition completely to a reverse of where the policy is right now, where basically promotion is the default, and it would be a deviation from that default to do the retention. So I do think waiver continues to be an important idea, and it's not inherently bad to do it that way. It's just sort of tilting the scales in one direction or another. If we do think that the interventions that will be, enacted in that retention year are going to make a difference, if we think that they're going to get a child from not quite reading successfully to reading successfully by the end of that year, then I think it's okay to not be skittish about the value of that retention year, and to not have to tilt the scales against it. I do think that this document has come a long way toward making it a much more communicative and sort of I guess I'll say team-based discussion, where it's not just, the caregiver or the parent is coming in and they're saying, they're being told, your child is repeating this year. It is a discussion. There's a presentation of some facts, of some research, of some materials. So I think the document has come a long way in that regard, and I think it's really positive. Um, I don't believe it is necessarily appropriate, or at least I'm not convinced that it's appropriate to go all the way to eliminating the idea of waiver and making it a default of promotion. If we're doing the retention idea. There was one other thing I wanted to raise. Give me one moment. Actually, that's it for now. I just wanted to, I really respect Mr. Greer's both thoughtfulness and intentions. I think they're really positive. Just wanted to articulate that other point of view on the whole project of what we're doing, because I think it's worth having it on the table as we go into more discussion in the next meeting.
Thank you. Dr. Maley McCarthy.
Yes, thank you. So what I did is I did some page by page. Let's see. On page 2, on page 10, I like that there's explicit wording that MTSS should not stand in the way of special education process. I also like that MTSS is kept within school hours. On page 11, number 3, and I think Mr. Greer referred to this in some way, should we include teacher credentials for delivering science of reading instruction? And will the instruction be provided by a teacher, a TA, or a computer program, which is not appropriate? And what kind of training does the teacher or TA have to support the instruction? Overall, Section D, I will not support a targeted retention policy, even with the escape clauses, and here are my reasons. Parents who do not speak English as a first language and parents from a background of poverty may not exercise their waivers, may be hesitant to engage within the school, and may not trust the school, may not understand the ramifications of retention. Given that there is a greater percentage of families of color who also come from a background of poverty, this retention policy will produce a greater number of retained students who come from a diverse racial, ethnic, and linguistic background. When students are retained for reading, do they have to also, and I'm using this word, it's a little harsh, but do they have to suffer through another year of the same math, the same science, the same social studies, the same PE, as well as the same art and music curricula? That's not in the student's best interest. Many times, children who struggle with reading don't necessarily struggle in other academic areas. Some do, but not necessarily. There's a strong body of research that does not endorse retention with respect to self-esteem, social development, and opportunities to interact with grade age level peers, and can lead to disenfranchisement, school refusal, and boredom that can trigger inattention and other classroom behaviors that might not lend to overall classroom engagement and instruction. And this is a punitive measure for students and families, in my opinion, despite all the parent engagement components included in this policy. And I do appreciate how you have increased and extended and changed language. I mean, I wonder if we should be studying how to retool and reconfigure what schools and classrooms look like, changing systems and schedules, and rethinking how we use all of the personnel in the building to promote better reading outcomes for all children, starting with kindergarten. I think that teachers are just now engaging in the process of training for the science of reading, which is foundational knowledge, as well as the pedagogy for implementing the science of reading. And this is very specific, and there are high stakes here. And so we are placing the burden of providing a specificity and intensity of reading intervention to struggling readers with teachers who are, just beginning their journey in this pedagogy, as well as it requires a strong MTSS system to prevent a large amount of students referred for attention. And I have talked about this in the past, and I've talked about this on federal levels with other research communities, that I don't know that there's a strong body of research to guide effective MTSS. There may be districts or schools that have demonstrated best practices using MTSS, but I wonder if there are schools within the state that have shown very good outcomes and impacts using a strong MTSS system that can be used as exemplars to help other systems. And would we as a department consider setting out some usable, some practicable guidelines for MTSS that are based on successes in other schools or systems. And then on page 14 in section D, 5F, I wonder if we're keeping tiers 2 and 3 during school hours as we should, asking parents to utilize before and after school programs because they refuse third grade retention can be viewed as a punitive requirement because they disagreed with the recommendation and the policy. So I wonder, I think this can be a problem for the school and the school district and the department. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Mailer McCarthy. Other board members? Okay, I have a few things that I'd like to bring. And I will start at the top of this section. Give me just one moment to get there. Sorry. Yeah. So a really key piece of information that I would like to have as we move forward with this going towards October is when we talk about policy A and the system of support for educators, I'd really like to know how many educators have been fully trained, and knowing that they're not all fully trained yet. When do we anticipate, when do the locals anticipate having all teachers trained? I know I did get a little bit of information from you today on what you had, and I know that you may not be able to give me the full numbers, but you could give me at least what the locals are anticipating, because I think when we look at timeline, we have to consider when full training implementation is happening before we're implementing. So I think it's important that we know when educators are trained, to the extent that you can get that information to me. On A3, it says professional learning is required to be offered by the LEA. I think offered, I would like to change that. I mean, because I don't want the LEA to say, well, we offered it, but teachers didn't take it. So I'd like a stronger word there, if possible, so that we're not just saying they have to offer it, we have to saying they have to implement it with fidelity in high quality. I just don't want that little escape hatch there. When we look at the training and the coaching, again, and I know I've brought this up before, but are we expecting this to be school day embedded PD or after school? And if it's after school, is there compensation offered? And perhaps that's something that's going to need to be in individual LEA plans. But I want that. I would like to know how that's going to be offered, whether we're expecting LEAs to do it as a embedded in the school day effort, or if we're saying you may do it any way you want, then we need to have them spell out their plan and whether or not they're going to honor teachers' time after school with compensation. On A5D, talks about observation. And I understand the importance of teachers who are learning being observed in the process, but I don't want LEAs to use this type of observation as a punitive type of observation that goes towards teacher evaluation. So I'd like for us to be very clear that these observations are non-evaluative, that they are instructional only, non-punitive. And again, in section B, number 5, with the system of assessments. And here it says SY 25-26. It says something different in the timeline below. So that's just something to catch. But so the universal screenings, and that we're going to have all this in place, it requires that we're ready by next year. So I just want to be sure that if we're going to require implementation by next school year, even though it's something different below, so I want clarification on which the timeline is. But I want to make sure that we have time to get everyone fully trained on the delivery of assessment and the use of the results of the assessment, how we use the results to drive instruction, that we have full training in place before we implement. And I know some of these are already assessments they're using regularly, and that's fine. And that can be information that you get to me, but I want the LEAs to be, and for us to be sure that this training has taken place and that everyone knows how to do it right and how to use the data ahead of time. And did we give a proper timeline to accomplish that? And in lose my place on where we are. So I'm on page. This is going to be easier for me to do on pages. I had a quick question on page 9 where it talks about proactive school-wide framework for supporting and increasing academic, behavioral, and social emotional outcomes for all students with areas of concern. And I wasn't sure how the behavioral and social emotional outcomes connected to the literacy policy, or if they're kind of a separate idea. And I'm not sure what the answer there is, but I wasn't sure because a lot of schools have separate things going on for behavioral and social emotional, and really nothing else in this policy addresses social emotional and behavioral concerns. So I wasn't sure how that fit. And in general, I am very concerned on page 10. And as we go through the parent implementation, I am really seriously concerned about human resources. Do we have the human resources to implement all of this in general? In specificity, when you get to page 11, where we're talking about the meetings that we're going to have, the invitation to collaborate on the development of an individual reading improvement plan with the teacher, principal or designee, and pertinent school personnel. That again, like I had reiterated last month, that sounds like an IEP. And that number of people required at every meeting is a humongous lift in schools that are going to, have really high numbers of students. And I look at that and I don't see how that is at all feasible. I think that it would make more sense to say that these invitations to collaborate with the teacher and or pertinent school personnel, and that administration, principal would be notified of which students are having the plan rather than trying to get your 1 or 2 administrators per school in each one of these meetings, because we're doing it over how many different grade levels with how many students per school. And in a 30-day period because we're requiring notification at 15 days and we're requiring a plan by 30 days. And I don't see how that is going to jive if we're requiring all of these people to be in every meeting. So I want us to consider that and think of changing that so that certainly admin is aware and knows what's going on and the number of students that are getting these plans, but not necessarily sitting in every meeting. And I'm hoping that a 30-day time window turns out to be enough time for teachers to meet with parents, but that is also a concern of mine. But I know that the urgency of having a plan in place makes sense at the same time. When we talk about promotion and retention, and there have been a lot shared on this, my concern is that we are making the main reason for retention based on a single test that we're using, as it says in D, that they have to demonstrate proficiency on MCAP. And I resist using a single data point to make this heavy a decision. And it says further down that screeners shouldn't be used. But if we're collecting all of this data through these several years of working with these children, if we have a student who is going through something really terrible personally at the time of the test, we may have a kid who's been doing okay and who's been demonstrating proficiency in class, but for whatever reason tanks the assessment. And if this is the only data point we're using to point to promotion or retention, I am concerned that we will be unfairly putting kids in the position of retention that may not be there because we're relying on a snapshot, a high stakes snapshot. So I don't know that I would like for it to be based on one single data point. I think that the wealth of data that we're collecting should and could be used to help inform that decision. That's how I feel. And we can certainly continue to discuss. And looking at page 13 again, with the school principal determining whether a student qualifies for good cause exemptions and that they have to make the recommendation in writing, and then that has to be reviewed and the district superintendent has to review all of these. That could be a humongous workload, intense workload. If the principal has to do every single one of these in writing, get them to the district superintendent. I can't imagine being a district superintendent in a really large district having to personally review and approve all of the principal's recommendations. So I'm concerned about that workload. I think it's intense. And with the read at home plan in a parental contract, with participation and requiring parents to participate in workshops and parent guided home reading activities. I think giving parents the tools they need to do these things at home makes some sense. I don't know how a school possibly enforces this contract. So rather than calling it a contract, saying you will do this, you will show up with this. I mean, families are under extreme stress in many situations. How about these are the things that we can give you and would like you to do at home? How can we support you? Rather than sign this contract and you will do this. So that was what I had for those sections. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I had to say. Okay. Moving on, we have the timeline for implementation. The only comment I had on this was that the universal screeners in this on page 16 says 26, 27, but further up in the document, it says 25, 26. So if we could just put those together, that would be great. And that is the only comment I had on the timeline. Is there anyone else that has any timeline comments? I don't see any hands up. Thank you. So moving on to responsibilities. Is there anyone with questions or comments in this section? Okay, I do. And I'm looking at the Maryland State Department of Education responsibilities. And I want to know if we currently have the staff capacity to do all of this. This is a big lift. This is a lot for MSDE to do. And I know that Dr. Smith's office is small. And I don't want us to overextend to where we can't properly support because we don't have enough people. So if we move forward with all of these supports, which I think are fantastic, I want us to have the people that we need. So as a board and as MSDE, let's figure out how to make sure you have what you need to do this and do this well, because I think the supports are going to be crucial. Um, and that's all I have. Anyone else? No? Okay. I think that's it. Dr. Smith and Dr. Collins, thank you so much. I saw you guys furiously taking notes. We appreciate that you take the time to listen to our input and feedback. I know that this is a Herculean task and it is important work. And I appreciate that you are taking the time to listen to not only board members, but to the public and stakeholders. And I'm really glad we're taking the time to do this right because it's crucial work. And you are very appreciated.
Ms. McCusker, can I ask a clarifying question? So knowing that we're pushing this to October, that'll give us more time to do some more editing, but also engage with board members if we have specific questions, correct? Wanted to know
Yes,
if there was an expectation for September that you had at all.
For the September board meeting?
Yeah.
Dr. Michael, would you like to speak to that? I see your hand up.
Happy to. We will give a very brief update on what we did today. And if there's anything specific further that staff would like to share, we can do that in the public meeting, but we're not going to spend, we're not going to spend a full work session. Our follow-up to this meeting will be the committee meeting in October. So we can look at that as the next step and simply an update. We will use opportunity for board members to follow up with staff to provide clarification, dive deeper between now and then so that we can get things worked out. And, I think we've got a couple points, I think some showed up today where we're gonna have to get a recommendation from the superintendent and staff, and the board's gonna have to deliberate on those few points. But we'll take that up in committee and then in the full board meeting in October.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. All right. With that, I am going to close the meeting. I don't think I have to take a motion to close, do I?
You do. I made that mistake in at my first meeting.
I believe.
Yes, you do.
So again, I would like to thank the public for their interest and sticking with us as we work through these very important policy issues. Our next meeting will be in October. Mr. Hands, what's the date? I don't have it in front of me.
It is October the 8th, or no, October the 10th, excuse me.
October 10th. Thank you very much. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Dr. Malin McCarthy. A second, Mr. Paul. All in favor? Oh, thank you very much. We are adjourned.